Oh my, what Grandpa can grow, by Anonymous. What are you doing, Grandpa? For being so young, I remember that day quite well. We had just arrived, a blaze of rambunctious kids storming through the side door and up 2 steps into the dated kitchen. My mother was shouting behind us to take off our shoes while dragging the bursting bag of child-rearing gear, which contained sippy cups, some spare clothes, and the grungy Barney whose threads wept at the thought of another round through the washing machine. At eye level, shoved in the back corner of the kitchen, was a round 1950s dinner table whose once white leather had been sunbathed to yellow. On top of the table, glistening beneath the Tiffany-style hanging lamp, were cheap plastic plant starter containers, surrounded by little piles of spilled dirt. The air was permeated with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and fresh-cut grass, spilling into the kitchen from the open patio door. In the middle of this picture of childhood paradise sat Grandpa on a bar stool next to the table. "Grandpa, what are you doing?" I persisted. Without hesitation, he looked me right in the eye and said, "I'm planting sucker trees, of course." Grandpa was a character I wish everyone had the pleasure of meeting. He stood at a height of 6 foot 2 inches tall, with silver hair around his ears that thinned as it crept up to the top of his head, and a little stubble in the wrinkles around his chin. His striking facade, blue eyes, and coffee-stained smile always conveyed a sense of warmth. On this particular day, he was wearing a shirt whose buttons held on for dear life across his stomach, but his arms were as thin as spaghetti. "Grandpa, suckers don't grow on trees," I protested. Smirking, he reached into the cabinet behind him and pulled out a large bag of suckers, the kind that are always on display at the bank. "Here," Grandpa said, handing me the entire bag. "Eat one, and when you're done, put the stick in this dirt right here." He then slid an empty plant starter across the table. Wide-eyed and skeptic, but all too glad for the candy, I did. Sure enough, that sucker stick did grow into a sucker tree. The next time I visited Grandpa, a brand new sucker was sticking right out of the dirt. After I grew my first sucker tree, I pestered my mom every day for weeks to get my brother in the stroller and race around the block to Grandpa's house. Upon arrival, I always had the option of either picking the sucker and eating it, or waiting for it to grow into a bigger sucker. A Tootsie Pop, a candy apple sucker, or whatever finest selection from the dollar store had to offer the week prior. Over and over, I would eat a sucker from the indoor garden in Grandpa's kitchen. This was then followed by packing the mushy wet paper stick back down into a cup of dirt. Grandpa filled our young lives with the gift of imagination. He taught us that happiness is earned with patience, and that it often comes in small packages. His own life was full of its own magic, in the sense that he didn't waste his time worrying about the rat race, to which most adults succumb. No, not Grandpa. His life was not defined by stocks or a rigorous plan to climb the corporate ladder. His wealth was measured by his family, and he was more than happy to spend an afternoon watching cartoons with his grandchildren. And while a lot of adults found his contentment in life off-putting, I really do think I was one of the luckiest people on earth to know him. After all, how many adults do you know who can turn the remnants of a planting, a vegetable garden, into magic and create a fond childhood memory? Grandpa explained that his dogs were small because he sprinkled them with fairy dust to keep them from growing big. A much more impressive explanation than the fact that he had 2 Shih Tzus and my parents had a lab. And he always gave the best advice, like making sure to eat dessert before dinner to ensure there was always room for it. I don't know about you, but after becoming an adult, I feel like I am racing to the end sometimes. The race starts early in the morning. Get up, get dressed, make breakfast, clean the dishes. Honey, please go get your shoes on. Where did I sit down my coffee? We cannot be late today. It's a never-ending cycle of checkboxes against a clock. And while these are all necessary parts of everyday life, I sometimes look up and my heart falls to the floor. When did I get so much gray hair? When did you start singing your alphabet correctly? When was the last time I sat down to watch Saturday morning cartoons instead of run the vacuum and swap loads of laundry with my breakfast and coffee in tow? So in honor of Grandpa, I call on us all to stop for a while today and to breathe some magic of contentment back into our lives, to allow ourselves to close our eyes to all of our worries and dive deep into the glorious moment, even to simply enjoy a sucker from the dollar store, preferably without the dirt. The author of this piece wishes to remain anonymous, but they have been a colleague and a close friend of mine for years. If you're interested in more inspirational stories, I encourage you to pick up this book, Beacons in the Darkness, Inspirational Stories from People I Know, available anywhere you can get books. Thank you.